Hi, I'm James. I'm an engineer. I did my training in mechanical engineering at MIT. Spent 5 years and a bit at SpaceX on the engine development team. And I have been at a fusion energy company for the last 5 years doing scientific computing. But today I'm here representing myself to talk about the InterpN interpolation library. So we'll sort of go through this like a guide to performance engineering for producing similar results. It's going to be a little fast because we only have time to cover about a third of the slides in the day. But we'll talk about stuff that we can do to configure the project before we actually start writing the code to get faster results. What we can do in the code to get faster results, and stuff that we can continue to do after we are done writing the code to keep getting even faster results. So yeah, InterpN does grid interpolation. It was originally built for real-time and embedded systems, so it does not allocate at all. It is completely no standard, no alloc. This turns out to work quite well for real-time systems. So that plot in the bottom right is a plot of data that is generated using InterpN interpolators. And then it also turns out that the patterns used to make things performant for embedded systems also work quite well for application level. So as far as I know, this is the fastest grid interpolation that you can get anywhere today. And it is some 300 and a bit times faster than Scipy at its peak, and at least 3 times faster than Scipy at the smallest gap. So let's talk about some project configuration stuff and stuff we can do before we write code. First thing is spend some quality time with the algorithm. A lot of the speed up here compared to Scipy comes from an algorithmic improvement. The general strategy for doing multidimensional grid interpolation is often referred to as a tensor product spline, because you can do your interpolation on one axis at a time, and it kind of looks like a tensor contraction. The better strategy for this doesn't involve indexing out all of the data under the convolutional footprint of the interpolator. Instead, you can think of it as having a tree of information dependencies, and you know exactly what shape that tree is at compile time. And so you can use fixed size intermediate storage on the stack that's a lot smaller than the whole footprint, and completely avoid allocation, and only touch the things that you need at a given time. Keep things small, keep them in cache, and keep it vectorized as well, because you don't need recursion to traverse a tree if you already know what shape it is. Next is project configuration. So definitely using full optimizations, right? But there are a couple other things you can do in your cargo.toml that keep squeezing more performance out. One is making sure that your whole project is compiled together by setting your code gen units to 1, or just a smaller number. You can tune it for a given project. And this is going to have a bigger and bigger effect on larger projects that would be split into multiple code gen units. And then you can also turn on link time optimization, LTO, which at a glance doesn't seem like it would make things faster. It's mainly about removing unused stuff from the binary. But it also makes things faster because a smaller binary is faster to load, and it's faster to find the things that you are actually using in that binary, the smaller it is. And then you can also turn on overflow checks for production code. So this is basically free reliability. 3%, right, is not exactly a log scale change in performance. So that's a cost I'll pay any day of the week for such a strong guarantee about the behavior of the program. And next, you can also turn on real vector instruction sets for x86 machines. By default, Rust targets a x86 instruction set that is sort of reflects like early 2000s era computers for compatibility reasons. For scientific computing stuff, I recommend targeting something like the x86-64v3 reference CPU, which includes instruction sets that roughly represent a like 2013 timeframe, and that includes the AVX2 and FMA instruction sets, which are very helpful, and just with like good treatment of the auto vectorizer, that'll get you a 2x speed up by itself on a modern machine. Speaking of vectorization, let's look at some patterns for that. So before we continue on, we should talk real quick about what vectorization is. The usual references to SIMD, single instruction, multiple data, where we can do a single instruction in assembly that does, say, multiply 4 numbers by 4 other numbers at the same time, which looks a lot like parallelism, but it's in a single-threaded, single-core environment. And it's also frequently sort of conceptually combined with the performance benefits of doing sequential reads from memory that make your memory accesses a lot more efficient. And then pipelining, separate from vectorization, is something that your CPU will do to run multiple independent operations in parallel, again, in a single threaded environment on a single core. And this layers on top of vectorization, so you can have multiple vector operations moving through pipelines at the same time. So if you organize your code for both of these, you can benefit from both and see pretty huge speedups. So this is sort of a standard pattern for loop vectorization, where you check your bounds before going into a loop and then do a very simple loop that does one operation. And this is, this is fine. This is better than nothing, but it's not the fastest thing that you can do. This is actually a lot faster, and unfortunately it's hard to show a simple example because what it's benefiting from is the complexity of it. So you'll notice a lot of inlining. So we're taking this whole tree of functions that then finally get rolled into basically the same pattern, where we have checked our bounds, and then we go into a loop and we do something on each iteration in the loop. But we're inlining all of this stuff into that loop, and that means all of that stuff can be optimized together. And so we both get vectorization across that function, across all of the independent operations in that function that can happen at the same time, which I think of as like wide vectorization as the complement to the long direction of vectorization along a loop. But the technical term is super word level parallelism, if you're looking for the section in the LLVM docs. And this gets you a lot more vector operations, and you can check that a couple ways. One is by disrupting it, turn off inlining so that things can't vectorize together, turn off your bounds checks so you can see that you lose your loop vectorization benefit. And you can also pop open the assembly and check, right? So you can use Godbolt for single file stuff and cargo show assembly for local stuff, and look for packed operations and panic branches that might be disrupting the generation of packed operations. And just make sure to actually turn on optimizations if you're using Godbolt, because otherwise you won't get any of that code gen that you're looking for, and you won't get your panic branches that are unusable optimized out either. And finally, really got to avoid allocation. Allocation is one of the #1 enemies. You often won't see the benefit of getting rid of allocation until you've gotten rid of all of it. But here's the difference between just a single allocation for the output versus no allocations at all, and that's already more than a factor of 2 improvement in performance, just to get rid of that last allocation and do a true zero copy pattern. So you can also unroll loops at compile time, and this can be a pretty hefty speed up. So the compiler will already unroll simple loops for you, but if you have a larger loop that you know could be collapsed by the compiler into something much more efficient, if only it could see the whole thing at once, you can use Crunchy to manually unroll pretty much any size of loop that you like, but it will get more and more expensive as you do that. So just be prepared for your computer to sound like a jet is taking off while it's compiling it. And we can also use some hardware operations like FMA, fused multiply add, that combine a multiplication and an addition into a single operation if your hardware supports it. And this is why we have this pattern here for switching feature flag between FMA versus no FMA. Because if your hardware doesn't have this available, it's going to be really slow. But if it does have it available, then that's another speed boost as well. And anything made in the last like 13 years is going to have FMA capability. But a lot of like small microcontrollers and stuff will not, or they'll have very slow modules for it if they have them at all. So even once we're done making all these improvements in the code, we can continue making things faster, right? And one of those is one way to do that is profile guided optimization. The pattern for this is to build an instrumented binary and run a reference workload that sort of runs the code the way that you expect it to be run in the wild. So this is different from your unit tests and it's different from your benchmarks. This is meant to be like a well-rounded representative use. And then you give that information to the compiler and compile it again. And the result that you'll usually get is something around a 15 to 30% speed up for real representative cases. And it's important to, again, separate those. So you run a workload that's representative and then run it back through your benchmarks, which are different from the workload so that you're not overtraining on specific cases. But this is a real and hefty speed up, and part of the reason for that is it lets your compilers see what are the rare error handling branches and stuff like that that don't need to be optimized at the expense of the real hot path. And you can do this for Python extensions, and InterpN's CI configuration provides a fairly reusable example of how to do PGO layered on top of Maturin and PyO3 for Python extensions for distribution. Next thing is thread parallelism. And if we hadn't done everything that we've done so far to make single-threaded performance better, we wouldn't get this linear speed up. So this takes a lot of thought already that happens long before you actually get to the point of necessarily threading it. But once you've got something that is, doesn't need to have an expensive initialization, doesn't mutate itself to during operations, so you don't have to have locks or message passing or allocate anything during initialization. Now you have something that you can get a serious linear thread speed up with, and that's very little additional code on top of the rest, which is why I kind of consider it a after code operation. But yeah, that's what we see with InterpN. And here's an example, a simpler example of a pattern for doing that, and especially using a cached access to the number of physical cores on the host machine so that you don't have to talk to the operating system every time you run one of these functions that's going to spin out a thread, at least aside from the bare minimum that is needed for the actual threading part. Okay, questions?